welcome back to the Beyond Waste podcast. We're bringing this back in coordination of a series of events we're doing with the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives and the release of their Zero Waste Master Plan. This is a three-part special. Part 1 is about incineration today, and parts 2 and 3 will also be about fall solutions to zero waste. We have with us today Addie from the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, Gaia for short, and also community expert Natalia from the Ironbound Community Corporation. Addie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Addie, and I am Gaia's Zero Waste Communities Coordinator for the US and Canada region, and I am here in New York City, use she, her pronouns. Natalia, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. Well, everybody, my name is Natalia Figuerato. I am the Environmental Justice Organizer at Ironbound Community Corporation. I would like to first of all thank Plan and Gaia for having me here today. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic and to truly demonstrate why it's important for us to think where our waste is going and who it is impacting. And I think that should be like the main takeaway from this conversation is to think, how does our production of waste on a daily basis matter, and not just in terms of our direct waste, but in terms of the businesses we support, the corporations we support, and how are different communities being affected and how are they being negatively affected, because I think that that's one of the main takeaways. A little bit of background on Ironbound Community Corporation. It's an organization that is based off of Newark, New Jersey, and it serves a Black and Brown low-income community. The Ironbound district in itself has about 50,000 residents, and the organization itself has a long history of community activism. It was founded in 1969 after a group of parents who wanted an after-school program protested for it and got it and created the corporation. And it developed into this beautiful organization that now continuously stands up for our community and puts our needs and wants first. And with that, there's also a huge history of fighting against pollution. Unfortunately, this community has been disproportionately affected by many industries and factories and corporations. We have many, many sources of pollution. And just to give a couple examples, we have a sewage treatment plant, we have a seaport, we have an airport, and of course, one of the largest incinerators in the nation.
Just to clear up some confusion about what we're talking about, incineration can hide behind a lot of different names.
Thermal treatment facilities is another name. Waste to energy plants, reused derived fuel, and cement kilns. And so the reason for this is that a lot of times these facilities can hide behind names that don't make them sound like they're incinerators, even when it's the same type of technology and basic principles.
One of the reasons why it's important to talk about incineration is because even though it's amazing that conversations are skewing more towards solutions these days, there does need to be consensus around what we do find unacceptable. And like Young was saying, there are all of these different technologies that at their core are just burning trash. So we need to understand their logic behind the technology and like why it's actually bad in order to fight incineration in all of its really harmful forms. So one of the reasons why incineration is, not the answer is because it is the least climate friendly waste option. So extracting new materials to make stuff that is then burned instead of recycled or reused takes more energy than is recovered. And it's also not a particularly effective way of generating energy compared to other forms of climate friendly energy generation. So a lot of people think, oh, you're turning waste into energy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is something that is good for the environment just because you're turning one bad thing into another.
Similar to what Addie said, the energy that's put into that item could be reused if you reuse the item, and then there would be no extra added input to that.
But I think in the conversation of false solutions, we really have to begin to talk about facts, right? And like when we have these conversations with our family and friends, we have to have like data that can back up our statement. So I wanted to give a couple fun facts in terms of incineration. One of them is that 79% of all municipal solid waste incinerators in the United States are located in environmental justice communities. And environmental justice communities are communities that are overburdened by different sources of pollution. So Ironbound is an environmental justice community. Going along that line, another fact is that 10 out of 12 incinerators that emit the greatest total annual amount of lead emissions are also in environmental justice communities. And exposure to lead is extremely detrimental for our health. It can impact all of our organs. It impacts our brain. It impacts our development, specifically of our children. And so the fight, as I mentioned, the fight within ICC against incineration has been long. New Jersey was supposed to have an incinerator in every county, but through the fight of ICC and community members, it didn't happen. What ended up happening, unfortunately, is that we got one incinerator in our own backyard in Ironbound. And that would be the Essex County Resource Recovery Facility, which is also known as Covanta Essex. And it's operated by Covanta, which is a corporation that provides waste management and incineration services across the nation. Unfortunately, they operate a majority of the incinerators in the country, and it just goes to show that this corporation really does not care about our well-being, but really cares about profit. And this specific incinerator within Ironbound burns about 3,000 tons of waste per day. Most of this waste is coming from New York City and surrounding counties. It doesn't actually come from the community of Ironbound, and the waste that is produced with Ironbound is not sufficient to sustain the incinerator. So that's when I talk about really thinking about what where our waste is going and who it is impacting. I'm from New York, and before my career and my job here at ICC, I didn't stop to think like where my waste was going. But now I'm more cautious about it. So I think this awareness is something that we can pass along to our family members or friends. This incinerator also emits the largest total amount of lead of any municipal solid waste incinerator in the country. And just for reference, a little bit of example, in a 2014 report, it showed that this incinerator emitted over 600 pounds of lead in comparison to the next high emitter, which was 380 pounds. So that's, more than 200 pounds of lead emission. And we have many sources of lead within Newark, because we have contaminated waters, we have lead in schools, and we see this impact in our children in Newark. For example, one of the examples of this is that Newark's children represent 3.8% of the state's children, but in relation to lead, Newark children represent 13% of the state's children with elevated blood lead levels. So this is a direct impact to our kids, right, to our future generations. And that's why, our fight is extremely important against these corporations and facilities.
What kind of talking points do you feel like have been most powerful when explaining incineration to members of your community? And I would also, as a separate question, would like to know, that's kind of like the main one, but also like here in New York City, for example, like incineration, the cost of composting has been under $16 million per year. Nationwide, the average cost to build an incinerator is $100 million, right? And just to build. And then in places like Baltimore, about half that much, $55 million, is what the incinerator costs in, maintenance costs every year. So I feel like if you're looking at the financial picture of incineration without any of the justice or public health or environmental, issues aside, just the math, when you're looking at all of the opportunity costs, the other programs that you could be spending, like that should be enough, right? So, and that's something that I feel like I'm personally always trying to talk about to other organizations here in my city, as someone who's engaged in climate justice organizing work. So I'm wondering, my other question is, how are y'all explaining this to other organizations and personalizing that argument? Because obviously we can't go alone in this, right?
Well, in terms of, I would just want to bring a point in terms of talking to the community. I think sometimes, like, the community within Ironbound is very aware of the incinerator, right? Very, very aware because of the smells, because of their health. And they know that incineration is bad. But I think that goes into your second question, Addie. I wouldn't say it's necessarily about talking to our community members, because our community members are extremely aware of the harm that comes with incineration, not just to their physical well-being, but also to our environmental, to their environment. But I think that goes into your second point, because it isn't the conversations that we have to have with our community members. It's the conversations that we need to have with different organizations, especially organizations that are based in the places where the waste is coming towards Newark, New Jersey, right? So it's about having, and I think that that's something that we are starting to work in, especially with our zero waste campaign. It's to emphasize that it's about talking to other organizations, especially so that they do community activism that focuses on reducing their waste, so that there is a reduction in waste that's coming towards us.
I'd love to hear, I think that, like, I've had the experience where some of the staff that I work with at universities are picking where to put their landfill waste, and they like are doing zero waste, they're doing compost, they're doing recycling, but they are still creating landfill waste. And so they like want to find the best option to send the landfill waste. And so I think that they can often like get pulled into like fancy language like waste to energy and like all of this other stuff that makes it sound sustainable. And so I'm curious, like how you would cut through that and be able to just like advise them on like seeing that it's just an incinerator.
Yeah. So I think I laugh a lot at waste to energy facilities and how they try to depict them as somewhat good, because in reality, burning, like an incinerator brings about the same emissions as burning coal, right? Like I feel like that's a big fact that I think when you bring it into conversation, is just how is that good for the environment at all, right? And waste to energy, you're saying that you're going to produce energy, right? But all the waste that you are burning, Addie touched upon this, all the waste that you are burning, it has to be produced again, right? And so instead of recycling or, composting or, trying to find ways to make this find a better solution for it is what we need. Because like I said, it's kind of like this cycle. There is no such thing as waste energy, because all that energy that you're producing has to be then reused to produce those same materials that you burned in the first place. I think that's the main talking point when talking about waste to energy facilities.
I only recently started looking into what incineration looks like here in New York City.
New York used to dump its waste in the ocean, and then it started burning it in an incinerator that's actually like 10 blocks from where I live now, in a mostly like Black and brown neighborhood. And then it started burying it after, it realized that incineration was really bad. It started burying it in a landfill, also in a different Black and brown neighborhood in a different part of the city. And then after it realized that was bad, it was just like, screw it, we're going to ship it out to Newark, where it's just going to get burned, but we're just not going to really acknowledge it in any way, shape, or form in our internal legislation. So it's just shipping the problem somewhere else that happens to be like 30 minutes away from the city.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you're originally from New York City, and I was just wondering what kind of way that you explain this phenomenon to people who live here, just because of the way that waste moves in such convoluted ways, especially in the United States. How do you, or would you explain the practice that many cities have of like sending their waste out to be burned elsewhere.
Yeah. So what to me is so interesting that I am also from a low income community of color here in New York City. And when having these discussions with community members, a lot of them don't even, like I said, a lot of people don't even think about where the waste is going, even though it is impacting people very similar to us. I think it's just about beginning these conversations, it's about, like I said, one, bringing out the facts, but also showing that it's other people that are being affected, right? It's other communities that are going to continue to withstand the effects of pollution on a daily matter, right? And I think it's hard because it's hard to get people out of their bubble, especially here in New York. Like you said, the waste moves super quickly. And now I think I felt with COVID, that has increased even more because there is little to no recycling. There is little exposure to, these concepts of zero waste. But my best advice would be to, be understanding, be patient when talking to other folks about where our waste is going, and really bring out the facts about how incineration is bad and how just not thinking about where your waste is going.
I know New Jersey recently passed this huge environmental justice bill. And I just wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit more about that legislation, and then also what you think it means. I mean, obviously that's like subjective, right? But like just what you feel like it's going to mean for incineration in your community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so about 2 weeks ago, we were able to pass an environmental justice bill after more than a decade of working with other organizations. We helped pass the strongest environmental justice bill and the first one of its kind in the country. It basically limits new pollution sources in neighborhoods that are already withstanding disproportionate burden, and it requires the State Department of Environmental Protection to deny permits or renewals to any facility that is already in overburdened communities if those projects pose health hazards and environmental risks, right? And I think that was a huge win for us because that really shows, because this includes incinerators, power plants, landfills, large recycling facilities, sewage treatment plants. This is kind of like a slap to the face to those big corporations. My organization will always say this is a lot thanks to the social justice movement that has risen out of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was the first time in this past summer that our governor showed any interest in signing this bill. And so we just took that chance. And with that, the advocacy that led to that within the last couple of months has been constant callings and, to our legislators, to political figures to support us in passing the bill. Yeah, that's as far as I, know about the bill's history. I know that it definitely took a long time. And so that's, I think, one of the messages that I wanted to send too, is that this isn't work that's going to be fast paced at all. And I think like a lot of community organizers can say that this is work that takes a lot of years. And sometimes we let that discourage us, but I would say we gotta keep on pushing for our own communities. Through community empowerment, we've had these big movements, and we've actually been successful at sending a message that we will not be stepped on, and that we will prioritize our own health, and we need others to prioritize our health, right?
Thanks so much, Natalia, for speaking with us today. I just wanted to give you space at the very end to give any plugs that for our Ironbound, but also for anyone who's listening right now, you can check out more about incineration, other false solutions, and real solutions to zero waste in Gaia's Zero Waste Master Plan. We'll include a link down below. Natalia, do you want to close us out?
Ironbound, we were just featured in in a documentary that's called The Sacrifice Zone, and it's a really cool documentary that touches upon Covanta and just the different sources of pollution within Ironbound. And I'm gonna drop the link to our website where we have a link to the trailer and also just how to get in touch to view the film. And if anybody wants to, further steps, we are asking for donations just in case for the future work that we're going to be doing. So if anybody wants to contribute to that and support our environmental justice community, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, that's the end of part 1 in our Fall Solution series with Gaia. Make sure you subscribe and like this, share it with some friends so that we can keep making awesome podcasts like this.